everybody. I'm going to begin because we're running a bit late. Can you hear me? Yes. Good. Okay, so this is the final session of the day, and we're going to hear what libraries need and want and think. So I'm delighted to have been asked to chair this, and it's going to be a mixture, I think, of opinion and views, practical stuff, and some vision. I have some questions prepared, but I think there'll be some in the room. So as they come to you, hold on to them till the end, and there's going to be plenty of time for questions. So I'm just going to do a very quick introduction, and then I'm going to say one more thing. So we have Jeremy Upton, University of Edinburgh. Jeremy's Director of Library and University Collections. Beth Montague-Hellen, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Head of Library and Information something, services at the Francis Crick Institute. Ruth Hegarty is our token publisher. We thought we'd have a publisher as well as some librarians. Learned Society Publishing. Ruth runs the publishing out of the Royal Irish Academy. Yep. So bringing that perspective, a learned society rather than a university press. But I think actually the lessons from this probably apply to all publishers, not just university presses, I'd imagine. And finally, Peter Barr, Head of Content and Collections, University of Sheffield, who's kindly taking part even though he's on parental leave from work at the moment. And the final thing I'm going to say is I did a questionnaire in advance of this to just hear what was on university press's minds. And this is one of the comments, a message. This was the message to librarians that somebody supplied. They may be in this room, they may not, I don't know. Your support is a boost in various ways. Financially, yes, but also reputationally, psychologically, brand-wise, internally and externally. You have the power to change things, and small university publishers have a lot of gratitude for your support. How can we build on these new connections and collaborations? So that's quite exciting. You have power, and so it'd be interesting to hear how that feels and whether you want that power and who else has the power beyond you. So that's the end of me, and I'm going to hand over to Jeremy to speak.
Okay, thank you very much. Nice to hear that some people think we have a lot of power. In my job, it doesn't always feel like that within my own institution, but good to hear that. First of all, obviously, being from the University of Edinburgh, I'm really pleased to see you all here today. It's great that you're seeing the city as its best. I would say this time of year, personally, is one of the best times of year, so I hope you have an opportunity to enjoy it. But as I said, it's a real pleasure to have you here today. And before I go into my kind of thoughts about what libraries want from publishers, I was just in the collaboration session. I think I can reflect on a couple of things I picked up. It was quite striking just speaking to one of my other library colleagues, in the way that you were talking about collaboration is very similar. The way we talk about collaboration and the kind of collaboration and why it works and where the limits sit within that. And I'll come on to that whole point about what are the opportunities, what we want from you. But I think there is that sense, and I know it's been coming out through the rest of the day, that as organizations and cultures, we are quite close, and we probably should be doing more to be aware of that and make the most of it. And that's speaking from my side as well. I've learnt quite a lot already just from having that brief opportunity to listen. So again, I was speaking to my colleague to gather some thoughts before I'm speaking to you today about what we want. And of course, the easy thing would be to say, can you give us some cheaper prices, please, on what we buy? But no, I'm here to talk rather at a deeper level. And I guess I'm kicking off coming from this as a library director and also having been involved in a number of the strategic discussions around about negotiations and where we go, how we get content, where we want to go. And I think the first thing I'd say what we want is exactly what we're doing here today. It's dialogue. We recognize, at least I feel from the library community, we have a change here, and we do not have all the solutions. We might have all the power, someone suggests. I don't think we do. But we certainly don't have all the answers to this kind of thing, and recognize that this is what we're talking about here is a big period of change, a new way of approaching things which not any of us at the moment yet understand. And with those kind of issues, the best way and the only way we're really going to resolve that is by using the ability of everyone from all sector. So I would absolutely emphasize that backing up today, it's about dialogue. It's about finding more opportunities to be together, to talk, to listen, to acknowledge where we see some difference, and try and work out where is this knowledge exchange world environment actually going to go, and how can we get the best from what we're able to do at the moment. And I think I know a few people in the session I was in mentioned the Liverpool monograph session, which I was lucky enough to be at myself. And I think that was a really great example where people came out of that and said, we may not have come away with all the solutions, far from it, but absolute recognition that the only way that we're going to find things out is by having more opportunities to sit down and talk to each other, and that's all parties who are involved in this endeavor, and make sure that we do this. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck in some of the patterns that we're in at the moment. I think my next reflection in terms of what we want, and it may not be so true for yourselves in this kind of area of publishing, but certainly what we pick up still from other areas of publishing is we want to work with partners who recognize that things have changed, that this kind of world is going to be different going forward, that we are looking for something new and different from what we have at the moment. And if we're being honest, none of us would set things up the way they are at the moment. I assume you'd agree with that. The way we operate, the legacy, I guess, with that, looking back towards the way we used to do things in print. If we're starting from scratch, we would not set up the systems the way we do at the moment. So we want to work with people who are really interested and can show that they're committed to make that kind of change. And of course, everybody references in terms of the opportunities that are out there that what happened during the COVID period. So I think, to me, there is no debate. We can do things better. Plenty of debate about how we do that, but there is no debate about it. So the key thing is we want to work with people who have that kind of commitment, prepared to face up to the challenges, have that kind of imagination to take it through. And one of my other roles is that I do jointly chair the Transitional Arrangements Oversight Group. Even though I'm on the group, I have to think every time about what the title of that group is. But one of the nice things about that group is we do have an opportunity to talk to publishers. And from a library side, and I'll exclude you in the room, take it from me, there are some we cannot get any sense of what their vision is about where they're trying to go to. And quite frankly, in the future, as libraries, I'm not particularly interested in talking to those kind of people anymore. I want to be talking about what's coming forward and what's coming through there. And that was highlighted to some degree. I'm sure most of you have had a look at the JISC report on transitional arrangements. It's well worth a look. I have to say that, of course, because we contributed to help put it together. But it's a really good document, and that was one of the things that picked up, that there are a number of these publishing groups we talk to where we don't get a sense of what they think. Do they have a vision within their strategy in terms of what they're trying to do? And I do think for libraries, and when it comes to negotiation, we will up that as a criteria. We will want to work with partners who are committed to that. We are not so interested anymore in wasting our time in talking to people who aren't. And that will be a future thing for us to think for. Thankfully, given the time I've spent with you today, it sounds like there are a lot of people here who are in that positive group, and I'm looking forward to those further conversations. I know a number of times comments will come through about partnership, and I've already heard that many times today in the sessions I've been, and that is the next thing we're looking for. It is about true partnership. It's about working together, having an openness, having a collaboration. And one of the other partnerships we've talked about, and I was reflecting a bit on this before today, is it was mentioned again about our partnership with academics. And again, thinking in terms of the way, if I'm honest, sometimes the way we speak to academics about what we think the future of publishing is, I said, it may not be exactly in line with the way that you speak to. But why are we doing that if we have a shared vision? Surely a sensible way would be for us to have more sense of all these partners speaking together, rather having that kind of, maybe that little bit of division about what we're saying to each other. And a kind of what came into mind is one of my colleagues says, and I've got to check, I'm assuming there's none of my colleagues from our estates department in here, because I really want them to work with me because I'm hoping to get some library developments. But what it reminded is one of my colleagues was attending an architecture event recently, and they were talking about what makes a successful building project. And I know this from personal experience. We have the three partners. We have the estates team, we have the libraries, and we also have the design architects. And where it really happens is that you just get that natural conversation that takes place between it, and you end up with a great result. And where you don't have that, where you have non-alignment with some of those conversations, it just doesn't happen, and you can end up with some real difficulties. And I thought it was quite a good example, because of course one of the partners in that is a commercial part. Architects, design teams, we tender for them, we get they earn good money, they make a business out of it, but it doesn't stop in that kind of environment of it being an effective way to deliver complex and difficult solutions to in a very creative way to problems that you have in front of you. So if it can work well in other environments, why can't we make it work better in this environment? Why can't we make it less fractured and be more collaborative, working together to get those kind of solutions? To build partnership, of course, what we need is, and I know colleagues will mention on this, is very much about, it has to be based on trust and transparency. Of course, we know you can't tell us everything. It's a commercial arrangement. But we still feel, I guess, on the library side, there are quite a lot of things which doesn't make sense as to why we can't share a bit more information if we truly are committed to trying to reach a shared goal in terms of how we deliver these kind of change. And of course, the age-old one is roundabout, why are you pricing at certain things? It's very difficult to say to our community to justify, which we have to do, why do we spend our money in that kind of way if we can't see and actually explain to some degree as to why it's delivering value, what is it about? There's still too much dark space in my mind round about that. And I think then just the final thing to finish up on, and I think it's a very practical thing really, is it's about, to us, in terms of our relationship with you, I have full respect for what publishers deliver for us, hopefully. I have a good understanding, I have close contacts with colleagues at EUP. But it's about the service as well. What we want is a good service. We know you provide a valuable service, but what we want is for you to provide that in the best possible way, where we understand the quality, where we have that really good understanding as to what you're bringing to it. So that's some quick high-level thoughts from me, and obviously be happy to contribute to the questions when they come through. Thank you.
So I'm going to come up here because I have some slides. I get very distracted when people are talking if I don't have something pretty to look at. So if you're like me, hopefully this will help. Yes, so I'm Beth Montague-Hellen, Head of Library and Information Services, which seems to have got missed off your little information bit there, at the Francis Crick Institute. This is the Francis Crick Institute. For those of you who don't know anything about us, we're a biomedical research institute in central London. We have about 1,200 researchers. We don't have any undergrads. We don't do any teaching. We just do research, which makes us a different proposition to the university libraries, really. Also, I used to be a researcher, and that really influences everything that I want from publishers, because for me, what these guys want is key. You say that we have the power. Well, actually, I would say they have the power. They write the research grants, and those research grants decide where they're going to publish. It decides what resources they need in order to write their literature reviews and find out what other people are doing in the field. They have the power. We can't say, oh yeah, actually, can you go and work in this field instead? Because there's a really nice publisher I'd like to work with, but we can't do that, unfortunately. So the first main point that I'm going to make, and I sat in on the OA models session earlier, which I thought was really great, but there was a key sentence in there which I thought was really pertinent, and that was about the fact that subscribe to open is a simple model that's complicated to explain. So if you've got this cool new model, you've been working on it for some time, you know all the details about it, it's great. You come to a library about it, how easy is that to explain it to me? Because all the other models that are popping up on your screen at the moment are all the things I'm dealing with. So I have a very small library team. There are 5 of us in total. And as the head of the library, I have to say yes or no to every single one of these. Subscribe to open is great, but every single version of that is slightly different. So when you come to us, have something simple. The model behind it can be really complicated. I don't care. I need to understand it. Because I need to be able to explain that. As Jeremy says, we've got to justify our costs. So I've got to explain that to senior people and say why I'm going for that. And if I don't understand it myself, I'm never going to manage to do that. So that was point number 1. The second thing, so in some of the responses that Bernie got, there was a question about whether it's essentially all about costs. What are the things that make us decide whether to take something or not? And this is my decision-making process, essentially. So, first of all, what do my researchers want? If they don't want it, I'm not getting it. If they do want it, I might get it. what do the funders want as well? Because, funders now are very much pushing us towards open access versions. If a publisher has no way of me publishing open access that's compliant with, say, the UKRI mandates, then that immediately goes on my, we don't really get on with them list. And it's harder for me to justify working with them. Number 3, are you moving towards a more equitable and open future? So I also sit on the Transformative Agreements group, and that's what we spend our time working on. And it's not just about how my researchers can publish, how my researchers can read. Libraries in general, we're those sorts of people. We care about the community, and we want everyone to be able to publish, and we want everyone to be able to read. So, and that's in the UK, that's, teaching heavy universities who might not have a research budget. It's small research institutions, so mine's pretty big compared to some of the other ones. They've got no budgets at all, really. But also it's people in developing countries. Is this a model that works for them? If not, do you have a different plan? So we care about that too. Number 4, in theory, can I pay for this? You would be surprised by the number of different pots of money libraries have and the rules that sit around all of them. So if I want Wellcome to pay for part of a publishing agreement that I have to justify that at the end of the year, and I have to show which Wellcome researchers that has benefited. UKRI, on the other hand, if I'm pushing towards open access, they're kind of okay with it. So we have to spend a lot of time going, okay, well, how do I pay for this? Things like the recent American Chemical Society change to pay for green open access. Almost no libraries have a budget that will pay for that because it's not really paying for open access. So when that happens, generally then we have to go to the researchers who have the power and say, can you pay for it with your funds? And they hate that. They really hate that, particularly at my institution. They hate that. So, in theory, can I pay for it? That's before we get to the costs. Finally, okay, well, how much is it going to cost? Because I like to say all these other things are really important, but I still need to pay for it. So costs do matter, but actually, if you can sell me on all of those other, if you can sell me on all those other things, I can probably find a way, as long as it's not an insane amount of money. So yeah, those were my rules, but I've kind of done a slightly broader scope version here because other libraries will prioritize other things. Costs to publish, costs to read, rights retentions policies, we're all very keen on that now. We've got one at the Crick, and I've already talked about ACS, but I will not be paying their green open access charge because everything that comes out of the Francis Crick already has a CC BY license on it. And they can get into an argument with me about that, and that is fine. And you'll see at the bottom, I've reiterated uncomplicated processes because once again, there's only so much time. The next point I wanted to make was about clarity. So again, I guess it feeds into this, how much time do we have? How many other publishers are we dealing with? The quicker I can find out the information about the things that you're publishing, the better. If I have to spend hours and hours looking for something, I might just give up. So, that includes a whole range of things. What's the cost? I have lost count of the number of meetings I've had with publishers where I keep saying, okay, cool, but how much is it going to cost me? And I get through an hour's meeting before anyone even mentions how much it's going to cost me. And I might get to the end of that hour and go, well, I love it, but there's no room in the budget. And everyone has wasted their time doing that. It's all very well going for the hard sell, but if there's no money for it, there's no money for it. So what's the cost is really, really important. What's the license? I think this is often something that comes up with small publishers and small publishers that are not necessarily very used to publishing open access. I used to work at the University of Sheffield, And we used to have a real difficulty with poetry journals, who they just, at that point, I mean, this was like 7 years ago, at that point, they just had not really got on board with what open access was. They were like, but we've put it on our website. It's free to everybody, right? And I'm like, no, that's no good. I need to put it in my repository. What's the deal there? So what's the license is really, really important. Rules around preprints, rules around green open access. Again, most libraries in this country are going to be putting things into a green open access repository because that's the easiest way to manage everything for the ref. We actually don't have that situation, but we do put everything into Europe PMC. So, you know, putting things into a repository is really important. And if, again, you're hunting around for the rules, we all want to do what the publisher says we're allowed to do, you know, what the publisher says we're allowed to do, what the funders say we're allowed to do. We find a middle way. You know, we want to be able to do that, but if we can't find the information, that's such a pain and such a waste of everybody's time. The final thing I wanted to say was, and it's a bit similar to the point that Jeremy made about us wanting to work with people where we understand the vision, we know where you're going. And, you know, as he says, I think the people in this room are quite good at this. When we talk to the kind of the mega publishers, I think what they want to say for their vision is to make as much money for stakeholders as possible. And that may be true, but that's not getting us on board. You know, we want to talk to people who are excited about pushing forward open access, who are excited about pushing forward global equity, who are looking at new ways of doing things, and who are excited about working with us. So, thank you. Shall I go back to the slide?
Do you want me to start talking?
Yeah, while there we go. There we go.
It's done. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So my job role is essentially acquisitions and collection management at the University of Sheffield, and I'm going to probably touch on many of the points that Jeremy and Beth have touched on, but I was really going to kind of go some way to kind of explaining, I suppose, some of the emotion that kind of lies behind this, because as Jeremy says, there's lots and lots that librarians and publishers have in common, but when we were planning this session and we were talking with Ruth about it, we did notice that there's a kind of fractiousness, right, between the relationship that exists at the moment, and a lot of this is kind of speaks, I suppose, to a wider political moment that we're in, that kind of everything is kind of very polarised and us and them. So I think what I want to do is go some way to explaining why that exists and kind of talk about some way to get out of it. And I realise that in explaining why it exists, I'm going very much for all librarians think this and all publishers think this kind of approach that I know is kind of necessarily simplistic. But I think, so if we're talking about kind of what libraries need or what librarians need is kind of really simply is they need to feel good about what they're doing. And often we, like, so for example, the University of Sheffield, we have a multi-million-pound budget. We have multiple staff who are involved in OA advocacy all the time. And often we don't really feel very good about the money that we're spending, and we don't feel like the effort we're putting in is affecting the kind of transition to open access that we wanted. And this goes back to kind of the things that have been touched on before, which is partnership. So partnership is necessary for us to kind of really understand that kind of we have a shared set of values, and transparency. Transparency is necessary for the really basic thing that Jeremy's touched upon, to kind of say whether the thing that you're spending is any value for money. It is suspicious, is it not, that the amount of publishing for one of the major publishers is exactly the same amount as the old Read subscription cost used to be, which is exactly the same amount that flowed on from our 1995 print subscriptions, right? So there can't be a transparency there if we can't really explain what the money is being spent for. And I think, yeah, so I think we're at a moment where potentially a lot of librarians are feeling very disillusioned with the transition to open access. And again, this was touched upon in the last talk about, you know, collaboration for university presses and like how much the role of kind of activism should play a role here. But most librarians who are involved in this are kind of to some extent true believers, right? They want to see publishing go as open access as possible and it to be kind of in the hands of the community. And what you get a lot of the time is the kind of conversations that Jeremy has to have as a library director, where the librarians are ready to go with different models, alternatives, cancelling the big deals, redirecting our money and doing that. But the political realities of how academic careers progress at the moment, how funding is sorted out, we can't get our Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Researches to sign off on doing these radical things. And so we end up signing deals that we don't like. We end up committing most of our money to people that we don't think are often kind of, fellow travellers in the process that we're doing. A lot of the people who do OA advocacy, who have been attracted to that role because they believe in open access, they end up in, like I say, at the University of Sheffield, they're in what we call our scholarly comms team. The actual day-to-day part of their job is largely administering read and publish agreements. So we attract them based on this idealism and then kind of force them to do the very thing that they were hoping to avoid. And in my case, a collections librarian should be buying things for the collection, should be excited, should be adding them. That's kind of how it worked when I worked in a small library. You shouldn't be kind of feeling that you've kind of been backed into a corner and you're having to spend most of your money on something you don't want. You should be feeling good about the money that you spend. And we should have been seeing this kind of change from, us building a local collection just for our users to us building and facilitating the open collection. So kind of we've reached this point of, disillusionment, and it's kind of bred a resentment, and some of that is probably just as, saying poor me, and it's not like legitimate, but some of it is that it has been an exploitative relationship. Too many publishers see libraries as a revenue source, right? And that's not unique just to commercial publishers. Is that the conversation begins is how can we protect our revenue and keep our revenue, not kind of like what are the values that underpin that. And the strange thing about working in library acquisitions is you're not buying for yourself, you're buying for a community that you don't always necessarily fully understand. So, often, many publishers have mini monopolies. There's certain things that we can't afford not to buy. If our researchers want the New England Journal of Medicine, I can't say to them, I've got you the Arizona Journal of Medicine at kind of a cheaper price. You've got to kind of buy certain products. So it has been an exploitative relationship with the big commercial publishers. And I think that's kind of, poisoned the relationship more general. That what you've seen there is that kind of people who are disillusioned, and it kind of, again, the open access movement almost beautifully coincides with the growth of social media and all the kind of problems of interacting there. So you've ended up with many librarians adopting a very, very idealistic, moralistic stance that kind of gets to kind of unworkable solutions, like publishers can't make any profit ever, publishers can't work with kind of certain countries, certain people. So, and I think kind of that kind of all publishers are bad, when we see the kind of diversity of publishers in the room and all the initiatives that are currently existing and undergoing, has been a stumbling block to what we kind of might have wanted to see. So I think that, the way forward to me is exactly the same as what all the others have touched on. We want to kind of see a resetting of this relationship. Ideally we want to see community-led publishers, not kind of market, or the decisions being led for the research community rather than by kind of market-based decisions. We want to see values over revenue. We kind of want, as much as possible, to see a move away from you take our content and sell it back to us, kind of hostage-taking approach, to a kind of more like value-added service. Again, all the kind of problems with the market and the structural problems with things, we have this kind of facile attachment to kind of growth all the time, growth, which is creating kind of sustainability problems in other places. And what I'd say to you is I think in many cases, just because of the way capitalism works, the big commercial publishers probably aren't in a position to be the ones to run these partnerships very well. So smaller and medium-sized publishers are the ones that can have the freedom to operate with. And certainly, if you work together, you build that shared understanding that Jeremy talks about. And certainly at Sheffield, the way we've tried to structure our budget is we are trying as much as possible, with all the problems that exist, to kind of free up our budget to spend it in these places and to look for partnerships. And definitely, again, a kind of shout out to JISC and the Open Access Community Fund, because that gives us places to spend our money. But yeah, we are looking for those partnerships with people who kind of believe the same things as us. We're not looking to just keep spending our money in the way that we've always spent it. And if we could stop, if our institutions allow us to stop, believe me, we'd stop.
Okay, so I'm the publisher here. I believe I'm mission-driven. We're a not-for-profit, a charity, a learned society, and I run the publishing house of the Royal Irish Academy based in Dublin. We publish journals and we publish books. We're hybrid publishers, but we'd love to flip our journals. We publish some OA books and we'd love to do more, design it from the beginning. But I want to talk about an experience that I'm having at the moment. We have a grant to investigate the idea of building a piece of infrastructure for Ireland. It's a publishing platform available for use by any journal or book publisher on the island of Ireland, free to read and free to publish. It would be linked in with library infrastructure for search and automatic deposit and repositories, probably a little bit like what Edinburgh University run for a group of journals. At the beginning, I was so excited by this idea. It was a golden opportunity for me and my team to learn more about best practice in OA, both in Ireland and internationally, and to help others in Ireland do the same. And actually, we have a few publishers here today that have come over and part of that grant funding, and hopefully manage to flip our own journals in the process. We'd do some research, we'd listen to the community and design something fit for purpose for Ireland. So I set up my monthly meetings, hired a project manager, and we pulled together a fantastic variety of people. People that I had worked with before and respected, like JSTOR and Publishing Ireland, and other people pulled in people new to me, people from the library publishing sector in Ireland and people from the international community who had built national platforms and others who were working on the Diamas project. I ran into my first roadblock during the peer review process of the grant. JSTOR was down as a partner, an American not-for-profit with whom I've had great experience. My journals are in there, free to read in the UK and Ireland as part of a collaboration with JISC. I had OA books in there, and they also sell subscriptions and create revenue for us to be able to publish more things. They were really supportive of me going OA and interested to experiment with it and give me advice. But the peer reviewer questioned why or how JSTOR could be a partner on this research project, as they were too commercial. As the project got underway, I realized that something strange had started to happen. I mentioned, in a meeting or something, that we in the Royal Irish Academy had calculated our publishing cost of a journal article of being around 2,500 to include both copy editing and indexing, platform costs and staff time, and that this was our APC, and it would also allow us to give waivers, in those circumstances where people would need them. But I discovered that librarians and others think APCs are far too discriminatory and far too highly priced. Another time I mentioned our read and publish deal, which allows for academics and universities in Ireland to publish OA. And I was really proud of it. A colleague of ours had negotiated it. He's here today. And it had seen our journals go from under 10% OA to being over 50%. And I'm hopeful it's going to allow us to flip, because we put a clause in there to say that if we had a certain number of subscriptions, we'd flip them open. But this type of deal was not greeted with pleasure or viewed as widening access, but was seen as the publisher tightening their grip on the OA market and distorting the pure aims of OA. So I found myself in a national meeting on OA, so not libraries, but maybe policymakers more and others. And I realized that I was red and really nervous, but feeling like I had to say something to put in a word for publishers because of this avalanche of negativity in the room. And there was only two publishers there. There was me and one other from a more typically commercial publisher. There are another 6 book publishers in Ireland and about 35 journal publishers that I'd ideally like to closely involve in this project, this infrastructure project. But the regular discussion about the oligopoly and about gouging by publishers leaves me wary of bringing them into the room. I've attended webinars on Diamond OA publishing, where librarians and library publishers talk about the work involved in dealing with content, the time involved in looking over it to make sure that it's okay to put up online, or to tidy up the layout, or to find the best audience for it. And my thoughts are, but that's what we can do for you. That's exactly what we do. We do it well. And we're about to publish some guidelines for publishers next week. And we were looking at our Library Association of Ireland guidelines, and we agreed in our group that we'd adopt those, but we've realised we really have to adapt them because they're very mandatory, and we have changed the language to we suggest you should consider diamond, or we suggest you should look into this, or consider this, or you need DOIs, you should consider orchids, all of those, that type of language. So we have felt that that's something that's useful in this multi-group that we have trying to collaborate and work together. It's quite difficult to do, you know. I think oftentimes we're in different rooms having conversations. Publishers and librarians or library publishers, and each of us don't know what's being said in the other room. Just like on social media, we're in silos, and these silos get in the way of getting to know each other and respecting each other and trusting each other. Some people consider that this OA debate is no longer a debate. They can be impatient when somebody comes into the room for the first time and says, what does this mean for me, for my book, or for my publishing house? Get with the program. We're done persuading is maybe what people feel when they walk into that room for the first time. I'd love to feel that my work is making a contribution to building a better society. I believe it does. And when I collaborate, I would like to feel that I'm bringing value to the partnership. I need to be able to contribute ideas, and for my contribution to be different to that of my partners. We need to believe that we can work together. We need to know that we have each other's backs. These relationships are all actually quite new to me. The ways in which I collaborated with libraries before was with author events, exhibitions, partnerships. Subscription agents would sell subscriptions in, and so I didn't have that direct pre-book or pre-journal relationship. It was more at the other end, at the dissemination end, that we used to collaborate. But now I need and want to work with libraries, and I want that collaboration to be fruitful for you and for me, and I want it to be fun. And I want my colleagues in publishing to see that and to follow. But I think I have to learn how to talk to one another first.
Great. Thank you. Can I have a round of applause for the speakers? Okay, over to you. We have 11 minutes for questions. Are there any questions? The app's been pretty silent today, so is it the same? No one's on the app. Okay, I'm gonna start then. So based on the responses to the questionnaire I put out to university presses, a couple of things that I don't think have been covered directly. So lots of what came back has been covered, which is really good to see. So there's alignment there, actually, even if the solutions aren't clear. One of the questions is about sustainability and recurring budget lines. What are you doing for the librarians? What are you doing to move support for collective funding models from one-time to recurring budget lines? And how sustainable are these budgets? Because OA presses rely. So there's a lot of nervousness there about, it might be okay now, but what happens in 3 years? So anyone on that?
Quite happy to make a start. And tell you honestly where we are at the moment, and obviously I guess a little bit about some of our ambitions. So I think top level, in terms of an environment, I still hold that there is enough money in the whole system for us to deliver something different. Quite how we manage to redirect that, I don't have the faintest idea, which is one of the reasons why we need to talk a lot more. Speaking directly locally, we made a decision last year that although we don't have a lot of spare capacity to do this, we've now reached a position in the kind of discussions in the environment that it was absolutely both appropriate and correct for us to at least set aside some money to start regularly supporting new initiatives. I think we felt particularly it wouldn't be appropriate for us to talk and say the kind of things I've been saying to you today if we didn't actually back it up with some real direct action. It's not a big fund, but we do now have a small fund where we regularly now start to invest in some of the new initiatives. We recognise that some of these may be long-term, some of them may not, but we think as a library we also have a duty to contribute and take some of the risk to help the conversation and trying to begin to understand as to what models might be the right appropriate ones to go forward. So it may not be immediately providing all the funds to give that kind of security, but I think, and I know a number of other institutions in the UK are doing similar, some putting more money towards it, but we are beginning to recognise that we slowly need to find that kind of financial space to begin supporting these things more.
So from my point of view, as a research institution, I pay for all of our open access out of the library budget. We pay to publish at the Crick, which lots of universities don't really have a publishing budget, but we do. So I don't need to transition from publishing to subscription spend because we're fine on that. The thing that keeps me up at night about future funding is that my institution is entirely funded by Wellcome, UKRI and Cancer Research UK. If, as I suspect they will, Wellcome and Cancer Research UK turn around and say, you can no longer use our money for transformative agreements, the 11 transformative agreements I have at the Francis Crick Institute stop. How do I transition that? So actually, every time somebody brings up a new read and publish agreement, my heart sinks because it just complicates matters for me in possibly a year's time when that is ripped away from us. Lots of universities won't be in quite such a situation, but a lot of them charge back against UKRI, and I think the whole sector will be in quite a lot of difficulty if those funders turn around and say it, and I think that's the biggest problem with funding that's coming up.
I mean, similar to what Jeremy said, at Sheffield we have a thing called the Open Scholarship Fund, which accounts for about 3% of our total budget, and the point of that fund was to fund things like the JISC Open Access Community Framework, community-owned publishers, things like that. The way we found that money is by not spending it in other places. So traditionally libraries used to kind of see what their underspend was and then use it at the end of the year to kind of, splurge on various things for the collection. We don't do that anymore. The existential challenge to that money is, so we're trying to pay for open infrastructure and publishing and the transformation agreements all out of the same budget, and depending how you model open access monographs, there's potential for that to eat up all the money and more. So we've definitely transitioned to recurrent spend because we know that's a useful thing, but the just pressures on the budget from everywhere are intense, and that's to say nothing of the whole scandal around e-textbooks and how much that costs for us to kind of supply as well. So there's pressure everywhere, and when the interesting point will be when it really comes on top, do we protect the open access funds, which is what I'd like to see first, and do we kind of make cuts elsewhere? Because that's really what will drive change, is just flat not having the money.
And I suppose from my perspective, I've a few 200-year-old journals and haven't fully flipped them away because I'm a little afraid of that in 3 years' time, I'll be the one responsible for breaking the run of the journal. So, and I ask people who are currently funding the Read and Publish, do you think you'll continue? And they say, well, we don't really know because we're subscribing people. Maybe the core government funding should fund it. And so they're the conversations that we're having. And I'm going to have to take a punt and just do it, I think.
So it's a little bit worrying, but it's better to have it out in the open than in our heads. So there's a couple of hands up. There's one over here towards the back. You're going to have to put it up again for the mic person. Thanks.
Hello, Tom Clark at Boydell and Brewer. You talked a lot about models, quite reasonably. I want to just ask about subjects and the battle for, I've got a load of, say, philosophy books or art books. How are they ever going to survive the funding battles? So science wins or not?
So I don't think they're out yet, but when the videos released from UKSG are on YouTube, I talked a lot about green at UKSG, and I think our slight obsession, is that the right word? I don't know, with thinking about flipping to OA only ever being gold. I think that humanities, social sciences to some extent would do really well at thinking about how green fits into that, because I don't think that gold is the way to go, because authors don't have the money to pay for it, and kind of specialist humanities libraries don't have the money to pay for it. I'm saying that from the point of view of someone who works entirely in biomedical research. We have the money to pay for it, but I think about those people all the time, and I could sit here and say, yeah, flip it to gold, yeah, we'll pay for it. But I know that there are all those people. The authors don't have the money. Flipping to gold in those fields, I think, is a really scary move.
Do you think green will work for humanities publishers? Do you think they'll still be able to, how will they generate money if it's online for free?
There's some quite good evidence to show that actually, particularly in humanities, people like the versions that have had the care and attention put onto it by publishers that are well typeset, that are actually still the hard copy versions of things. And there's quite a lot of evidence out there that shows that people will go and look at the green version and go, oh yeah, this looks quite interesting, and then go and source the final version. And I think more research needs to be in that field, but I'm very convinced by that because I hate reading books online. I hate it. I would much rather go and get the physical copy for textbooks. I read novels online. But I think that actually, using green as a kind of, yeah, here's what it looks like. Come and have a quick look, a bit like when you browse through something in a bookshop before you buy it. I think that green could help with that, and I don't think it will reduce sales, actually, because I think in those areas, people don't want to read it online.
So I think, just going back to the point, I admit in some of my earlier thinking, I kind of fell a bit into the trap of thinking as we make this move, there's going to be this wonderful single model which is going to solve everything across the board. And I think reflecting on the GISC report, one of the things which came through very strongly for me is just that reminder that, yeah, of course, there is going to be disciplinary difference. That doesn't make any of our lives easier. I think my position at the moment is that, yes, we need to work and think a bit harder, that different disciplines will have different characteristics when it comes to publishing. Quite how we solve that and quite how we support those different models, I'm not sure. But certainly at the moment, I'm convinced that we need to do more work to understand how does a discipline like philosophy make use of the functionality, the technology we have, which is available to us to best deliver for that community in terms of a publishing model. But what it may mean, I think, where my thinking is at the moment, is we're going to see a lot of perhaps slightly more fragmentation if we really are going to get the best results for these disciplines.
I mean, I think there's the Open Library of Humanities would be the most obvious example, but humanities, diamond kind of models work well for them, but that requires this kind of altruism from the sector, and it's like whether that can kind of stand hard times is a thing that remains to be seen. I think always when you talk about the transition, like what libraries have to balance is we have to pay, to meet all the kind of regulations that our own researchers are referable and do all of that and have the agreements for that. And we're also, in an ideal world, investing for the strength of the sector for things that don't necessarily directly benefit us. And again, I don't quite know. I'm worried, but I hope it's more we continue to support that transformational thing as much as just that kind of transactional part of what we need to do as institutions. So it's a challenge, but I think part of libraries' responsibility is to make sure that that part of the sector doesn't fall down.
Mm-hmm. Just sorry, one other thing I'd add in. I think for a long time there's a big role for societies in this, the academic societies. I think bringing them into this conversation into a much more wider way about how do they think in terms of their discipline, do they want knowledge dissemination to work, is an important conversation that needs to happen.
Okay. We're at time, and now the hands are coming up. This always happens. If someone's got a question that one person can answer really quickly, keep your hand up. Over there. And then we'll finish. Thanks.
This is not a question, this is a friendly challenge for the panel. Chris Bennett, Cambridge University Press. Thank you very much. Some of us have talked about some of these things before. I'd like to pick up on a couple of points. Ruth, you demonstrated that there are significant costs in publishing. Many publishers, and many of the publishers in the room, are struggling to cover those costs. Not all publishers are equal, not all publishers are the same, and not all publishers are trying to extract excess value from the system. At the same time, if we carry on the way in which we're going, we will have another huge sustainability problem. You've articulated that. Jeremy, you're right to say that there's money in the system. There are already examples, and I know that the Max Planck Society in Germany won't mind me saying this, where they have redistributed spend and taken money out of the big deal. Commercial businesses will take what the market can bear. There is a very simple answer to that problem, and though the other major part of the problem, which is about academic reward, recognition and incentive, is less simple, that's the other side of the solution. But it isn't a solution not to have a dialogue with the publishing industry or to consider all publishers the same in this respect. So my challenge to you as librarians is, don't make this just our problem. Step up with your own institutions, and there are some of us who will stand right there with you to change things. Thank you.
Excellent.
I do want to come back on that then.
Oh, we've got a comeback here, sorry.
Just because, so I mentioned that I presented at UKSG. UKSG is a publisher and librarian conference. It is massive. If your institutions are not there, make sure next year that they are, because that's where that conversation's happening. We are having that conversation. Librarians and publishers are talking to each other. We are looking at different models. We are talking about our shared issues, and we are working together. So, make sure that you are in that room, because that is where that conversation is happening. And as I said, the researchers have got all the power, and a lot of the time, you guys are talking to researchers. They come straight to you often and bypass us. And if you can be having conversations with them, then do. We are trying.
Okay, that's the end. Thank you so much. To all of you.
Love that, the last word.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it was very nice to end on a note about the power of collaboration, which I think is what we're all about. So that draws the first day of sessions to a close. Thanks to all our speakers, chairs, and the excellent questions from the audience. Even if you don't like the app, that's fine. We're all in the room. There's a break now, and then those who have dinner tickets, and you'll know because it'll be on your name badge, so wear your name badge when you come for dinner, should join us for the drinks reception sponsored by the Association of University Presses. This takes place from 6 p.m. in South Hall, with dinner served at 7 p.m. And to get to South Hall, it's really not far at all. So you go out of the John McIntyre Centre, where we are just now, turn left, immediately left, then right, and go in a straight line, and you'll get to South Hall. There are signposts, I believe. It's 30 yards. It's no distance. It's fine. And the enjoyment doesn't end there. From 9 p.m, we're hosting a ceilidh, yay! Sponsored by Edinburgh University Press to celebrate our 75th anniversary, and that will be taking place in South Hall. And all delegates are very welcome, so if you're heading elsewhere for dinner, be sure to come back to South Hall for 9 p.m. to join us for some dancing. We've booked the excellent Raging Ceilidh Band, who will call out all the steps, so this is open to absolute beginners. Dancing is optional though, so you can just come along and enjoy the music or find a quieter spot in the bar, which is located in the adjacent Kirkland Hall. Tomorrow, refreshments will be available in the foyer from 8:30 a.m, and the first session, which is Charles Watkinson's Plenary on reclaiming open access for the university press community, will start at 9 a.m. in Pentland in here. And also tomorrow, and this connects in nicely with our opening keynote from Amina Shah, where she talked about the National Library's Gaelic storyteller, we have our very own Gaelic storyteller in the form of an EUP colleague, Ailey McLennan, who will be on hand to teach some Gaelic phrases to you in the breaks. So do look out for you tonight. Look out for her, tomorrow. So yeah, if the ceilidh isn't Scottish enough for you tonight, we've got more tomorrow. So I will see you then. Thank you.